Hello and welcome to the Keyboard Chronicles, a podcast for keyboard players. I'm your host, David Holloway, and I'm thrilled as always to be here with you. It's a little bit of a special episode, this one. I've just had the pleasure of speaking for an hour with Mr. Steve Gregory and Mr. Mike Wilcox. Now, Steve and Mike, as you'll hear, are long-term friends, although I only met one of them for the first time face-to-face after 25 years about 6 weeks ago. And Mike, who those who regularly listen may know as Mike from MidnightMastering.com, one of our gold sponsors. Mike and I have been friends for many, many years, both in the physical and virtual realms. So as you'll hear, we were involved in an incredibly innovative project for its time called Res Rocket Surfer, which then became Rocket Network. As you'll hear, there were quite a fascinating history of the people that worked on it. The three of us, in the case of Steve, he was an employee, and Mike and I were helping out as testers of the software. It was a fascinating journey with a piece of software that probably was before its time. And as you may or may not be aware, there are some great virtual jamming solutions now online to allow people from remote distances to make music with each other. It's been a pleasure making music with these two gentlemen for so many years, and I hope you enjoy the interview because there's lots of history in there, and I'll talk to you at the end of the show. All right, I'm super pleased to be talking to two of the sexiest gentlemen alive. How are you, Steve and Mike?
Very well, Dave.
No pressure. So as I've just explained in the introduction, Steve, Mike and I go back a long, long time, although Steve and I physically met for the first time only about 6 weeks ago, and Mike and Steve have never met at all until 10 minutes ago, which is pretty impressive, isn't it?
Yes.
So, yeah, lovely to have you both on board. So as I also explained in the introduction, we're going to talk a little bit about both your careers to date and then how the three of us came together in what is, and it's documented on the internet, so it must be true, the world's first virtual band. So, but I will start off. I'll start with you, Mike. Tell us a little bit about yourself. And look, keyboard players out there, be warned, Mike's actually a drummer, but let's not hold that against him. Mike, tell us about your musical upbringing.
I got introduced to music, like a lot of guys, at a very young age, primary school. I got pushed into clarinets and flutes and all kind of woodwind instruments at primary age. And it wasn't something I was interested in, but I was convinced by my parents, if you stick to this, we'll let you play the drums. I thought, right,
Yes. Yeah.
I'll get through the scales, I'll work through the majority of the basic stuff, which really gave me a foundation in music theory anyway, which I needed. And by the time I got to high school, I was allowed to get a drum kit, progressed from the pots and pans, got proper lessons, and found my love of, how I was going to be a musician for the future, we'll say. But when you say not a keyboard player, if I had a second instrument, which is how I compose music, I definitely do play the keys to compose. But performing-wise, I'm definitely a drummer. Yeah.
No, that's very true. And so the theory stuff, Mike, I mean, Steve, you may have done theory. I'm a total heathen when it comes to theory. So you did do a bit of theory in that. You felt that's probably served you well to this day.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I think if any foundation to be able to write music is to understand scales, the different various chords you need to do, and just time signatures, anything that's going to help you build a foundation in, creation of music. I know a lot of guys write without even knowing how to, put the fingers on a guitar and they come up with a fantastic sounding chord. And I'm sure that's a skill that anyone can grab. But just having the proper foundations is always a great way to sort of get your basic place.
True. My favourite key to this day remains J major. Steve, tell us about your musical upbringing.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in New Zealand, and I was at a school in a place called Nelson, which is basically a rural farming community, but they happened to have a really good music teacher at the high school that I was at. And out of that one school, there were marching bands and pipe bands and brass bands and all sorts of stuff. And so everybody that went there, it was a regular state school, had to do two instruments. That was just part of the requirement. It's like 1,500 people. And so, yeah, I was introduced. I was playing probably like you, Mike. I was playing clarinet, which I hated, and I'd walk around with the saxophone players, and until I was allowed to play that. And so that's what I started with. But we had a guy come in and demonstrate this thing called MIDI, and this is back in the mid '80s, and he brought these synthesizers and Simmons drums and this old computer thing, and I was absolutely blown away with what you could do. And so that's really what started me. And I was probably, I don't know, 13, 14 or something, I guess, then, and got into that, and then started saving up for a synthesizer. And I was sort of involved with computers as well, and so I was programming as well. And then back when I was about 12, goes back a long way.
Nice. What were you programming on back then, Steve?
Commodore 64. Yeah,
I was about to say.
I was writing music. I was writing music with a Commodore 64. It was terrible. You'd literally type in every single note, and it was dreadful. But good foundation. Yeah.
That's funny. And look, because we're all of a similar age, I'm not going to disclose all our ages. I'll just say that Mike's 92 and I'm 28, but roughly the same age. So let's take it forward from our childhoods to 1994. And I get a bit fuzzy on the years here. I remember I joined the internet, as it was, or CompuServe, in 1994. But I actually I thought, given we're a technological trio in our involvement with Res Rocket and then Rocket Network, I got an AI platform to do a summary of Res Rocket, and I thought I'd read it for our viewers and listeners because it's nice and short and sharp. I do want to put a huge disclaimer, though. I'm not sure some of the numbers it quotes are verifiable or accurate. So I actually feel like the numbers that were first members were lower than what AI quotes. So take it with a grain of salt. But otherwise, it seems pretty accurate. So the Res Rocket Surfer project was launched in November 1994. That seems about right. It's considered the first virtual online band with 1,000 members communicating through a mailing list and FTP server. That seems inflated, but not probably that far off. Founded by musicians Willie Henschel and Tim Brandt, true, the project began by posting messages and sound files on Usenet. Now, I'm going to stop there. I don't recall that.
I think that's, Usenet, I have a feeling, is where I found out about it.
Okay, so maybe they did.
We weren't using it for music, but I certainly found out about it off one of those news channels, I think, early on.
Yeah, okay. All right. So I'll give the benefit of the doubt there. And then it said later expanding to an FTP and website. Now, obviously, and I'll talk about the Moo in a minute, that seems roughly right. By January 1995, the project had amassed 600 members, even though it said it started with 1,000. So don't ask me how that works. Go AI. Fostering a community of collaboration and creativity. Absolutely. By April 95, Henschel and Brand joined forces with Canton Becker and Matt Moller. Absolutely. Two Chicago University students who created a MIDI Moo, a virtual environment enabling multi-user real-time music making across the internet. Now, real-time is debatable, but it was brilliant. So this collaboration led to the development of we called it the Dragon, but the DRGN, or the Distributed Real-Time Groove Network software. The project continued to evolve, and in July 1997, Res Rocket Surfer's Dragon app was unveiled at the Intel New Music Festival, I'm assuming it was, offering subscribers access to public recording studios, jam sessions, and chat rooms. That's more like that's the second sort of iteration of it. In April 98, Res Rocket Surfer caught the attention of Paul Allen, who the nerds out there of our age would know was one of the co-founders of Microsoft, who provided significant funding leading to the birth of what was then known as Res Rocket Surfer, became Rocket Network, and it was capable of fully professional quality recording of real live musicians. And we'll talk about the reality of that too. It was quite cool. However, as the project grew, it obviously got bigger and more corporate, and then it was acquired by DigiDesign /Avid in March 2003, marking the end of it as a solely online collaboration platform. There you go. Is that a fair summary, gents?
Yeah,
you can connect the dots there, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So let's go back to 1994. I mean, for those of us that are old enough out there listening and watching, most of you either weren't on the internet or it only just started. Well, at least in an Australian context, guys. I mean, Steve, I know you're at uni. You probably were on the internet, from, say, 92, 93 at the earliest?
I was at uni in 1990. I was doing computer science, so we had the internet
Oh, there you
then,
go.
but it's probably one of the earliest. Yeah.
Yeah, and Mike, you would have been slightly after that.
Oh, yep, 28-bit dial-up. Absolutely.
You 28. That was like I know when Rocket first started. And we'll talk about it in a second. The first Dragon client I downloaded, I remember, was 501 kilobytes, and I was trying to download it on a 9600 baud modem, and I think it took like 45 minutes to download.
Yes, you're actually right. I remember the 9600.
Yes. So all right. So we're all relatively new to the internet. It was a new thing worldwide. Everyone knows. And so to hear, so I'm really interested, not so much in my story, but your stories of how you got involved. But I'll just quickly tell mine. Back in the days of real paper magazines with glossy covers, there was an industry mag where Willie Henschel, as one of the co-founders, was interviewed talking about this amazing new piece of software called Dragon. It had only been in existence for, 6 months to 12 months. And he just gave an email address saying, anyone out there that wants to join and get involved in testing this, I'm putting words in his mouth, drop me an email. So I went home to my little 9600 baud modem and sent him an email. And like you guys, was the three, to my understanding, the first three Australians to ever get involved with it. And my understanding is the initial iteration, there were only about 50 or 60 of the core jammers. But enough about me. Mike, I'll start with you. Do you remember how, if at all, how you got involved?
Yeah, I think it was a similar story. There was an expression of interest put out there. It seemed like an amazing, innovative thing to do. Being a drummer, I wasn't quite sure how I'd be involved in it. I had keyboards. I knew how MIDI worked. I had the internet at its infancy. And I thought, look, I'm just going to say, look, I'm here. I'm in Australia. Do you want someone from Australia to participate? And I think they were bang on for getting someone on the opposite side of the world to just test this thing out, So, they got back to me pretty quickly with we were definitely interested in having you on board.
I actually never thought of that. Here I was thinking of my huge talent that got me the job, but that's quite right. They'd be wanting to test the traffic on the other side of the world.
We were guinea pigs.
Oh,
we were just guinea pigs.
That's devastating, but true. Steve, tell me about how you got involved.
Well, it's funny because I was just thinking the same thing, because I was thinking I auditioned, thinking I was this incredible musician, but I was probably, when you narrow it down to the number of people in Australia who had the internet and who were musicians and could connect the keyboard, there was probably only about 4 of us.
That's right.
Yes.
And just on the auditions, probably worth covering again. I feel like we're three old men on a veranda talking about the olden days, but it's still worth it. Auditioning in that respect, and I did the same. There was no. Actually, I don't know about you. Maybe I did call London on the phone at the time. I can't remember whether there was a phone call involved. There might have been. I think I might have chatted before or after. But the actual audition was using the Dragon client. So I may or may not, with the video version of this podcast, be able to give a screenshot of the Dragon. I've got to see if it's around. I'm sure it is somewhere. All it was... rather than me talking, Steve, describe the Dragon, what the original version was like and what it involved.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was written in a pretty high level kind of scripting language, and from a technical point of view, it wasn't particularly complicated at all. And it was a bit like something like HyperCard or one of those things on the Mac years ago, which had a dreadful interface. But you just kind of clicked on a few buttons with your mouse and did things. But the thing that it could do is it could actually record MIDI data coming in, which was the information from a synthesizer that controls, but basically gives information on what notes you were playing. So you could record a very small amount of a loop effectively and send that across the internet.
And it was like on a grid.
In a nutshell, yeah.
Yeah, it was like on a grid. Yes. It was on a grid, was it? Was it a 4-bar grid? I can't remember.
Oh, that's a good point. I think there were 16 notes. Yeah, so I can't remember whether that was 1 bar. It was a 4. I can't remember.
So you literally connected your MIDI module to your computer, which back in the day was a 5-pin DIN connection into, in case of my Mac, whatever that awful the connection was into the Mac. And then you connected your MIDI device, and from memory, you just clicked on checkboxes. You crossed boxes.
You did it sequentially. You tapped it in. Yeah, step time. But it did support some level of real-time recording, because I remember I played a bass line and I actually played it. That was my audition. So it wasn't just you clicking on it. Yeah.
Oh, that just shows the level I was working at. That's
Yeah.
interesting. Mike, what do you recall about the first time? Did you, I assume you auditioned as well, and the first time you used the app, what did you think?
Yeah, look, going back to Steve's sort of introduction to MIDI, I got my toes in with Amiga and Ataris, and that kind of really basic MIDI recording software. And the introduction to this, I thought, what is this? How are they going to make this into some sort of professional, studio application? And not really understanding where it was going, I thought, oh, this is not going to be possible to get a band together, and wondering exactly, is my part going to be heard by just another person? And when you're jamming with someone, you might want to stop and change it or erase it. But it developed really quickly into something that really became an intuitive thing for the person at that end, but also receiving stuff from other people was just amazing. It was inspiring to get all these parts coming in,
Yeah.
being from another part of the world, thinking, "Oh my God, that's just come in from 15,000 kilometers away, or whatever." And the realization of that really hit really quickly, and I thought, "This is amazing. This is something that no one's ever done before."
That's right. And yeah, it's probably worth describing again briefly the interface. So obviously the Dragon interface, we've talked about how you got notes, and I've just learned myself you could actually play in things like bass via MIDI, which is brilliant. And then obviously it was intrinsically connected. And Steve, you're from a programming background, so feel free to roll your eyes at how badly I described this. But essentially it was connected to a chat room where you instigated the commands as far as sharing tracks and that. For me, just probably your better place to describe it. Describe how that worked.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing behind it, I mean, everybody said this couldn't be done because there was no way to play in real time with anyone across the internet because of the lag. But the way they got around it was by having everything in a loop. So you play something in, when you were happy with it, you'd press send, and then it would synchronize the next time around the loop. And so it actually made it you could use it for performance as well as creating songs. So I think that was probably the real innovation, was getting your head around how to get away from that real-time nature of things, and it worked really well. But yeah, as you said, the back end, I guess, of it was this chat room, and it just stored the information that was coming in and then just sent it out to everybody else and synced it up.
And it was one, I'd argue it was one of its strengths, and I'm not really au fait with a lot of the current jamming software, but I'm hoping some of them have the similar thing, because in a real band, half the fun is the camaraderie and the hang. And the hang was a huge part of what being in Res Rocket was about. And as I said, I feel like it was 50 or 60 of us originally, and it certainly grew, that hanging in that chat room. And for those young'uns amongst us, this is literally a text-based chat room. And then as things evolved, we had that amazing application called See You, See Me, that you could have grainy black and white pixelated video to see what each other was doing across your modem. It was a core part of it, wasn't it? I mean, how long, I don't actually recall the explicit times each of you were involved. Mike, when did you sort of dip out of Res Rocket? Sort of after 2 or 3 years? I can't remember.
I remember it all sort of came to a climax with the CD. We were going to release a commercial track, and the parts were written, the songs had been written. I don't know if they'd actually mixed them yet, but that just, it all came to that head with the cut. Basically, how was this all going to be divided up, and who was going to get what out of the sales? And really, then I thought, this is probably not for me. The fun of it's been taken out because of the corporate side of it, and people wanting to actually monetize it. So I felt, I think I'll leave them to deal with that.
Yeah, and so and I'm really keen to put some other context around that. So yeah, it was really exciting at the time that some of the music that was generated out of these jam sessions, and they happened all times of the day, and particularly for us Australians, are interesting times of the night quite regularly. And so there were, I think it was around 12 songs that were agreed upon. And I've only briefly mentioned Will and Tim and Canton and Matt as the founders, but just, singling out Tim Brand as an example. If you Google Tim Brand's name, he has had a stellar career and still has a stellar career as an amazing producer. And that was to the fore with Res Rocket. And there were 12 songs. I'm assuming, not putting words in Tim's mouth because I'm not sure, but I know the album as such was at least mixed. I don't know whether it was ever mastered. I've certainly got a copy of the mixed version. And, I only played a small role on 2 or 3 of the songs, but I think all of us, had roles in that. It sounded amazing, sounded new, sounded different. And I do want to emphasize that the issues over how it would work financially was certainly not necessarily sitting with Res Rocket as such. It was just one of those more, because there were so many of us involved, everyone had different perceptions on how that should work, and resolution wasn't able to be come to. I think that's probably a diplomatic way of saying it, Steve. No pressure on you.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the thing as well to sort of realise is in context with this that they were building a software company as well, and so there was significant investment coming into that side of it. And so we had offices in London, there was one in Santa Fe and in San Francisco as well, and so there were a lot of people involved with a lot of money that it was getting pretty complicated, I think. So and
I mean, Res Rocket played a big role in your life in that you moved from Queensland to London and then spent a number of years there, and then you you ended up in the US as well, didn't you? With the the second phase, I like to think of it, which is Rocket Network, funded by Paul Allen and I assume others, being based out of San Francisco at that stage, those couple of years before the internet crash, the internet company crash. It was an amazing time. I had the privilege of going over there, and that app was actually allowing people to use audio data. Again, Steve, do you want to briefly describe how that works? Because it was sort of articulating with software that we all still use today.
Yeah. I mean, that back then, I mean, that was the .com boom. I mean, obviously it turned into a bust as well, but it was an incredible time, particularly to be in San Francisco where all this money was flowing in, because it was like, the railroad had just been invented basically. And so there was just money pouring in for anything that had anything to do with the internet. And so, you heard stories of people, chartering private jets to go for meetings and then turning up and they got the day wrong. And, it's just crazy stuff, and I don't know the amount of money that was pumped into Res Rocket, but it was tens of millions. And I mean, we had a magazine, we had staff of full-time editors and journalists working on stuff. I mean, it was unbelievable. I mean, we had superstar artists turning up in the office to come see us and play with, and I mean, it was a really, really crazy time. But in terms of kind of what happened in your original question, there is that the software did get bundled in to Pro Tools, into something called DigiDelivery. So that really, it's my understanding now, is that's mainly used for video. It still exists today, but it's used for sending like high quality versions of like video films as they're being made, the dailies and that sort of stuff. So,
and even prior to that, I know the first iterations of the audio version, just for those out there that use either, what is now Logic Pro, Logic, Cubase and Digital Performer, I think were the 3 that essentially it was set up on websites. You would log in and you could use the Rocket Network plugin, and you could have your Cubase or Logic session open, and it did essentially how we described, except you could now record your audio piece, click on a button, it would upload and sync with the other person's Logic. I think you had to be on the same platform from memory. I don't think it would go like with Cubase and so on. But it was another big step forward. And just going to your point about the money with the .com boom, I mean, I had the privilege of being employed, I think, I'm going to guess and say nearly 2 years or at least a year as an online support facilitator. I was working a day job, and then after hours, I was paid what for me was a fortune back then. It was $20 an hour to help people use the software. And with the exchange rate, it was like $40 an hour. And I thought, it doesn't get any better than this. I'm making music. I'm online in a virtual band, and I'm being paid $40 an hour to do it. Doesn't get any better than that. Mike, did you ever try the audio version? I think you tried some of that. I can't recall.
Yeah, I did dip into it. Obviously, with the whole wanting to do stuff acoustically with drums, but that part of it really appealed to me. So, the internet had got faster. It started to look like it was going to be possible to lay live drum tracks down and stuff like that. But it was around the sort of time I also sort of dipped my toe out of it. So I didn't really get a full feel of how that ended up transpiring.
Yeah. No, that's good. And So, I mean, I think, well, as it said, about in 2003, it was acquired, and that was the end of it, sort of as a separate entity, so to speak. So it certainly affected a lot of people. There are a lot of people employed, Steve, as you mentioned, particularly towards the end in San Francisco and so on. And it's still a community of people that somewhat keep in touch, which is wonderful. And I've still got some friends from those time, including you two, of course. And the reason we were chosen, aside from our amazing chops, and now I've discovered because we're on the other end of the world, we all had sort of backgrounds in technology, and I'm really keen to just explore with both of you. And I'll start with you, Mike. You have played, like me, played in bands for basically most of your life as an adult. But I do want to raise an issue that we used to joke about many years ago, but you only 24 hours ago sent me a video of it, and I actually regret joking about it because it's bloody amazing. Tell us about the Mike Wilcox, if not trademarked, deserves to be trademarked, drum suit.
Right, we have talked about it for years, and it's the elusive, no one's ever seen drum suit, which I will not take credit for coming up with the idea, but Mick Fleetwood definitely was the first person I ever saw in Fleetwood Mac play a piece of clothing, we'll call it, that had triggers built into it. So
Oh, wow.
at some stage during their live performances, he would hop out behind the kit, come out the front with a vest on, and he would simply be tapping certain hotspots, we'll call them, and they'd be triggering sounds. And it just fascinated. I thought, how is this happening? And there was no internet around to Google these sort of things. So I was quite into technology with drumming. I bought triggers and Simmons drums and Pad 80s and anything I could get my hands on that was remotely percussive electronic based. And was experimenting in live situations, doing recordings, all sorts of stuff. And I thought, I'm going to build one of these suits. I'm going to work out how he did it with trial and error. So as bare bones as I could get, I went to army disposal place. I bought a jumpsuit with a camo jumpsuit. Thought this will look great on stage. And I thought, what triggers electronic pulses? And piezo transducers happen to be a fantastic, cheap way to trigger a percussive kind of element anyway. And they're $2, $3. So I thought, great, I'm going to start with these, and they're relatively robust. So being hit, they're not going to break straight away. And then I thought, right, now I need to trigger some sort of sounds. And this Roland Pad 80 I had, which is got built-in pads you can play with sticks, also had some external inputs with 8 quarter-inch jacks, which could lead to other pads or any other kind of triggered sources. So I built a custom loom. A mate of mine worked at Telstra at the time, and he said, look, I've got this really solid loom with about 30 cables inside it. I thought, that is fantastic. I'm going to wire it all up from quarter-inch jacks inputs into a Pad 80 to a 30-meter cable, which was going to just take me around the stage because I was going to perform like Mick Fleetwood. And I got my mum to sew in these piezo transducers into various hot spots in this jumpsuit. And it was just trial and error where they were going to sit and where they would stay without moving, and just a bit of finessing about the trigger sensitivity. And a lot of with drum triggering is the double triggering. Like if you hit this one, it's not going to trigger that one. And I eventually came up with something that sounded great. Oh, the sounds I was triggering was a Alesis D4, which is probably one of the biggest industry standard sound modules for drums. So the suit went into the Pad 80. The Pad 80 triggered via MIDI the Alesis drum sound module. And I had, how many did I have? I had around my chest I had 2, around my abdomen I had 2, and in my hips I had 2. So essentially I had a kick and a snare, and I had a tom and a crash. And I don't know if you guys have heard of EEPROM chips, but I had a special device that I got a guy to, I'd send him samples, audio samples, like a reverse snare was a really popular thing back in the 80s. And I got him, so can you put a reverse snare onto an EEPROM, whack it in there, and this device would, again, be like a source. So whenever I hit this particular thing, it wouldn't go to the Alesis D4, it would go off to this EEPROM device. I took a lot of stuff to gigs. It was crazy. I'd set up my normal drum kit and take another hour to set up all the electronics. But just as proof of concept, Dave saw it last night. And it kind of worked. I mean, I
It
don't
did.
think people necessarily believed what was happening on stage was happening because it was kind of unique, you know. But yeah, the action mimicked the sound, so it had to be true. Yeah.
It sounded truly amazing, and obviously Mike was part of a band that had legitimate notoriety. You know, as a great band back at the time, and they sounded great. And it was a brilliant cover that I've seen of Def Leppard "Pour Some Sugar on Me," and it sounded just top notch. It really did sound good. So yeah, look, I'm trying to convince Mike to put it up on YouTube somewhere so I can link to it, but we'll see how that goes. It is truly amazing.
I don't know about that.
No, I know. And the other thing I want to talk about, Mike, before I jump back to Steve, is obviously in your background, and those that are regular listeners of our podcast or viewers of our podcast that stay right to the end know that I give you a shout out as one of our gold sponsors of the show. And I think those that do listen will know I always say, and if you want really top-notch mixing and mastering work, Mike from Midnight Mastering is the guy to go to, and that I highly recommend him because you have, in fact, mixed and mastered 2 of my albums. And obviously we go back a long way, but you've got a stellar production career that goes back, 25, 30 years?
Yeah, I've been on both sides of the studio in a very, high level capacity, doing everything from runner to doing production, assistant production, mixing, and I'm really taking a real liking to mastering. That's kind of my end game, if you know what I mean. It seems to be that you found what you really like doing, and I think to a lot of people that it's possibly the most important process for any kind of mixing and mastering process. I like to call myself the polisher. How's that sound?
It's good.
You get that mix that just needs a little bit of polish, a little bit of magic that needs mixing. So I really take a lot of pride in giving someone's final audio production the best it can possibly sound. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. And you mentioned that you've been on both sides of the studio. You've obviously had some really serious success, whether it was with the Vagrants, with Lazy Susan, which I'll be linking to. I mean, I owe my total non-career as a musician, the few fun bits I've had, partly are due to you. I mean, I got to help out on one Lazy Susan album. That was a highlight in my career. It's just, you've obviously played a lot of live gigs. So, I mean, given we are a podcast for keyboard players and gigging musicians, a lot of them, I mean, looking back, what are some of the things you've learned as a live performing musician? Mike, it's a big question, but...
Oh, where do you start? Gear. You've just got to have good gear. Like, I don't know how much to say. Don't ever cheap out on gear. If you're playing a lot, don't look for the cheapest version of what you need. If you want a reliable setup and you want it to sound the best it can every time, just buy the best you can afford. I mean, it's the best advice I can give anyone that's really thinking about trying to get that gig to sound as good as it can.
Yeah, agreed. And Steve, speaking of musicians, I always dreamed growing up that the ideal combo, particularly in the 80s, was to be able to play keyboards well and be a sax player. Well, you are both. So I'm jealous. And so tell us about, obviously you did programming, like you did all sorts of computer science related stuff. You're working broadly in that industry still, but throughout that whole time, including the rocket stuff, you've kept a really active career in music, and we're going to link to your amazing project Red Mercury. Maybe start with that, but link in all the other stuff you've done over the years in that respect.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I remember when I left high school, I wanted to go and do music at university, and my parents said to me, no, go and get a real job kind of thing, So I ended up going to university doing computer science, but I managed to somehow, through all the stuff I was doing, link it back to creative something or other along the way. So in my final year for my honours year, I wrote music software, I wrote a sampler and I wrote a sequencer and a few things like that. So that's actually stood me in really good stead. And with the Rocket project, as you said, I came over to London in a technical capacity more than anything else. And it was really, I mean, I came over just to try and get close to what was going on, because I think like anybody, you kind of think, well, if I'm here somehow, I'll make it and I'll be famous and everything. But, the reality is that I've kind of been sort of fame adjacent, So I've made a cup of tea for Kylie Minogue, but I've never actually been on like a record or anything. So in some ways it's kind of been a bit frustrating. But Yeah, I know. The good thing, I suppose, is that by being involved in the tech side of it, I've had a good career, which has allowed me to buy the gear. So it's gone all into buying lots of hardware and stuff like that. But yeah, I've sold a few things over time, which I now regret, and they're now about the price of a house. So,
I do remember you talking
yeah.
once. So yeah, what was one of the ones you sold, and you've looked back? There was some amazing piece of gear. Yeah.
Yeah, well, probably the one that really comes out that I can think of is the Jupiter 8. I had one of those, and I sold it for $1,000, and they're worth, when I looked at it the other day, they're worth about £15,000.
Wow.
And my one was autographed by the keyboard player from the band Chicago, and a big road case his entire life. It's worth an absolute fortune. So someone's got it and probably bought themselves a nice house out of it. So yeah. But but then I've been over here in the UK again for the past 10 years. So I came back. I mean, I think the interesting thing is that everyone I've talked to who's been involved in Res Rocket, it really was. It's kind of made quite a lasting impact on their lives, and even though it's sort of a short time, I think everyone's gone and remembers it as being a really kind of pivotal moment in their careers or their life. So that was one of the reasons I came back here and thought, well, I'll try and see if I can, rekindle that magic, without seeming like a dad playing in a garage.
And so tell us more about Red Mercury, because the stuff that you've got there on Spotify and Apple Music and so on, it is amazing, and it's getting, it's had a lot of streams, and particularly compared to my stuff. Tell us about your approach now and how you do go about making the music, and also equally importantly the videos, because the videos you've released for a couple of them are amazing as well.
Well, I decided it was finally time to actually do something creative, because I've really been talking about it for years, just like we are now, talking about all this great stuff I've done in the past. I had nothing to point at to actually prove that I was actually a musician. So I thought I'd better sit down and actually write some stuff. But I went and enrolled in, there's a place here in London called Point Blank Music School, and went and did the mixing mastering course there, because I was kind of all right. I was good from the technical point of view, but I mean, to then actually get good at production, that would really help to go and get some formal qualifications. So that helped. But yeah, recently I've got into modular gear, which is this tech gear, which is something I've really, really enjoyed. And it's going back to hardware, but it's completely kind of made up of all these little bits that you buy individually, and you can basically build your own synthesizer the way you want it. So I end up doing loads of kind of weird sound processing and stuff to create, new sound effects and that kind of thing. So so Red Mercury is really just kind of an outlet for me to do whatever comes to mind. Whether any of it's kind of commercially relevant, I don't know, but I enjoy listening to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've heard how addictive modular can be. I've mentioned before on this podcast. We had Sarah Bell. We had Sarah Bell Reid on the show once, who is an educator in this area. She creates her own amazing modular stuff, and it's dangerous. How do you control yourself? Like, how tempted are you on a daily basis to go out and buy more modules?
Oh, it's quite easy. You can just run out of money. So
true.
So no, I mean, what I've done, I've got these two racks here that I've only got a certain amount of slots in them, so they're kind of full. So if anything else that I need, I've got to pull something else out, So that kind of keeps you in one
rack
spot.
Space.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah.
And the other one, Steve, is I know you've done a lot of session work over the years, and I love that term you use, fame adjacent, because that certainly applies to me as well. And so tell us about when we met in London about 6 weeks ago. You had a great story. I don't want to talk it up too much to put the pressure on, but there was a great story about how you were employed for some session work that didn't quite turn out how you expected.
Yeah, well, when I came over here, I thought I'd try and supplement my income doing some session work as a sax player, and I can't remember how I kind of advertised myself, but I ended up getting these quite high-profile jobs, which I was quite surprised about. And I went along to one which was they had the whole backing singers from the Lighthouse Family, and there was the drummer from Sade or something in it. I'm like, wow, these people are really good, and did a couple of those gigs, and I think I did all right. I mean, I mean, who knows, actually thinking back. But I subsequently found out that there is a guy in London whose name is Steve Gregory, who's very, very famous sax player. He played on Careless Whisper for George Michael, in amongst other things. And so basically what had happened is I'd turned up and taken his work. Yes, so I do apologise. I mean,
look, it's obviously stood the test of time. It's great.
Yeah, so anyway, someone's probably going around saying, "Oh, you think your sax playing's a bit off?" But
no, I'm sure it wasn't. I'm sure it wasn't.
Yeah.
No, that's an amazing story. Now, I'm going to. I apologise, and I haven't warned either of you guys, but I'm actually going to apply our usual guest questions to each of you as well. So, starting with you, Mike, is there a memorable on-stage train wreck? Doesn't matter which outfit, when it's happened, where something's gone just horrifically wrong that you can look back on now and laugh.
Last night's gig.
Oh, there you go.
If it's ever a nightmare, it's playing a click track. I mean, I'll confess, the bands I've played in for many years have relied on click tracks, for better or worse. There's, two sides to that whole argument. But, and I'm obviously monitoring click as a drummer. And if the guitarist misses a chorus or a mid-8 or a bridge or something, that's the end of that. That's a train wreck for the rest of the song. Unfortunately, I'm in control of the backing track, so I can actually just stop it and we're live for the rest of the set. But
yeah,
they're regular train wrecks, unfortunately.
Love it. Yeah, I can understand that. Steve, any that come to mind for you?
I was just thinking, actually. I'm glad you asked me second because it gave me an opportunity to think of some. But, I mean, I do remember one. I had to give a technical demonstration of what sort of music technology was all about. And fortunately, it was only at a high school, but there were about 1,000 people there, and I was up on stage with all the keyboards and everything. And I was using an EPS, Insonic EPS 16 Plus to run the whole thing. It had the sequencer and all the samples in it, and the hard drive erased itself just as I went in, and so I literally couldn't load anything. And so it was like having to do stand-up comedy and just trying to keep people, talk about music rather than actually do any of it. That one's the one that probably wakes me up at night thinking about. That was one of the worst things I've ever.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm hearing you.
Yeah. I think the only other thing I was going to say is just that one thing that was a real eye opener for me, particularly coming here to London, was just the professionalism and the level of the musicians here that are working. And I mean, previous I'd said, I'm a keyboard player, and I'd sort of go and I could hack my way through it. But I mean, I wouldn't even admit to it with some level what these people are. They're unbelievable. And we recently, just going back to that Mercury project over lockdown, it had always been my dream to work with a symphony orchestra. And I found out that there are all these classical musicians who couldn't work through COVID. And so as a result, someone very sort of entrepreneurial over in Eastern Europe got together these incredible musicians, and they put together a symphony orchestra, and you could rent them sort of for an hour at a time, and they buy a block and you could get an 80-piece orchestra. So we used them for that, and I've never seen musicianship like this in my life. They sat down with the sheet music that I'd produced and played it first time perfectly, and that was a tape, then they were done. It was just incredible.
Yeah.
Because have you ever been smack bang in the middle of an orchestra, Steve or Mike?
No, I've recorded orchestras. Yeah.
Oh yeah, you would. Of course, you would have. Yeah, and because and apologies again to listeners, and I think I've mentioned this once before, maybe on a live stream. I've only done it once, but I was in a production of Jesus Christ Superstar in a 43-piece orchestra as the synthesizer player for those little bits and pieces. And there's one song, can't remember which it was, where I don't play at all, but the whole orchestra plays at full volume. That was such an eye-opener to me on the power of an orchestra coming from a rock band background. It's like, there's something better than a rock band, and it's an orchestra in full flight if you're sitting in the middle of it. Just amazing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So no, great story, Steve. Thank you. And then the other, well, actually, going back to your fame adjacent comment and going back to also the Rocket Network, we did get to demonstrate the software to some really notable people. And obviously, again, this was, well, at least in the early days, it was pre-cameras, and the See You See Me sometimes You might have been able to see them, Steve. I didn't have the bandwidth to be able to you see me. So my recollections is I think I had the pleasure of demoing amongst many others. It's not as if I was demoing. I think Stevie Wonder and B.B. King were my two.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Any ones that stand out for you?
Joe Satriani was a big one. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
He came to the office while we were there. Yeah. So, there was a demo we did at NAMM, I think it was, which is the music conference in LA. And we had Joe Satriani playing guitar, Stevie Wonder playing piano, and I got to play my wind controller, which is the electric sax, along with them. So that was probably definitely a life highlight.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Mike, were you involved in any of those demos? I'm sure you were the Stevie Wonder one of the. No,
I can't remember being. We demoed it, but not to some.
I just remember I remember getting up at like 4:00 one morning, and it was I could be wrong, and apologies to any Rocket Network people that end up hearing this, and I've got B.B. King wrong, but my strong recollection is it was 4:00 in the morning for B.B. King. But I could be right. It doesn't seem obvious he would be a person to come and check out virtual internet software, like jamming software, but that's my recollection, so apologies if I got that wrong. Anyway, so that's the fame adjacency. I think you need to trademark that term. And so now we'll jump into it's essentially our last question, which we call the quick fire 10. So 10 short and sharp answers to 10 quick questions. And I'll ask you both each time, starting with you, Mike, each time, and then Steve. So the first one is first album you ever heard, Mike.
Oh, definitely Back in Black.
Oh, wow.
First album that really hit home, we'll say.
Good. Steve.
It would be Oxygen by Jean-Michel Jarre.
Yeah, nice. Most important pre-gig ritual. So I know, Mike, you play a few more gigs than probably both Steve and I combined, but what's something you have to do before a gig to feel like you're settled for the gig?
Check everything's plugged in properly.
Yeah, you're such a tech man. That's great. Steve?
Yeah, well, I don't play live so much anymore, but as far as sax playing, it would definitely be having multiple reeds because I'd no doubt break one, so that'd be something.
True. Yeah. One question we asked, which doesn't really apply to the three of us because we all have day jobs, but if you hadn't have been a musician, what do you think your career choice would have been aside from your current day job?
I, in the audio field, would have always dreamt of being in post-production for motion picture.
Yeah.
I've watched an endless amounts of docos on Lucas Productions and, the endless amounts of... It's just a fantastic career that I would love to have done.
Steve?
Yeah, the movies for sure.
Yeah.
So probably visual effects. Again, some of the stuff I'm doing now, just because I've been frustrated, never did it for real, so I'm going back trying to do my own little versions of it. But yeah, post-production film, I think.
Yeah, great. And Mike, when you are using keyboards, do you use the transpose button or do you change keys in your head?
Transpose all the way, baby.
And look, I'm going to segue in there because I'm fully in sympathy. And were a witness to one of my most humiliating episodes in music ever. And you won't recall this at all, but when I helped out on whatever the Lazy Susan album was, and we were at the Billy Field studio, can't remember the name of the studio, and I'd practiced whatever song it is that you guys wanted me to play. I turned up there having learnt it in a particular key, and one of you said, no, now we're going to play it in this other key on this piano. So there was no transpose button.
A real piano.
Yeah. And there was no transpose key, obviously, on the piano. And it's the most humiliating thing ever in front of four guys I totally respected. I had to say, I'm really sorry, but I can't do that on the fly. I just can't. And so we traipsed up the stairs, Mike, I'm not sure it was you or one of the other guys, to Billy Field himself, who lived above the studio, and asked him for a keyboard so that I could use a piano on a keyboard with a transpose button. So there you go. You were a direct witness to one of my most humiliating moments. I bet you don't recall that at all.
Oh, look, I vaguely remember there being a drama, but I didn't know it was about the key being changed on the last minute.
There you go. Steve, yeah, what I assume you're an adjust-on-the-fly guy?
Yeah, but I mean, if you write your own music, you just keep it at the same key. So
Yeah,
probably
that's right. Good call.
No, I can, but I mean, I don't really read music. I sort of I sort of do. I read chords, and then I play play the melodies from by ear. So I mean, my theory is not as good as it should be, really.
No,
but,
same.
it's enough to get by for what I need. So.
Yeah, would kill to be a sight reader, but sadly.
Yeah.
So name a song, Mike, that you used to love, but you've played it to death now.
Oh, I'll give you 20 albums worth if you really need me to. K-San, I don't know, that's the first one that comes to mind.
Yeah, good call.
There's thousands of them.
Yeah, no, K-San's definitely a good call. Steve.
Well, I think for me, it would have to be Axel F from Beverly Hills Cop, because I used to play that on the piano at school to impress the girls. And I actually learned to play it with the right hand and the left hand at the same time. And I don't know anyone else who can do that. So that's probably one of my great life skills, actually.
I'm sure there's lots of musicians out there. So it is impressive you're doing both hands, Steve. I know the right hand only. And it's still at band practice in my current band. In between songs, I'll do that to annoy my bandmate. So I think that's a great pick. Favorite gig you've ever done, Mike?
The first one that comes to mind is actually a support act. Being located in Tassie, where I've lived for the majority of my life, we get international acts very, very rarely. And the band I was in at the time, with a drum set, ironically, we got offered a spot to open for Rick Astley.
Oh, wow.
And I just remember that being the biggest gig we've ever done and the biggest venue that Tasmania's ever had. And I'm thinking, we've hit the pinnacle. This is it. I can just stop now.
And see, and like 15 years ago, you wouldn't have admitted that, but Rick Astley is now, he's like not redeemed himself, but he's considered a really well-rounded, amazing musician.
Yeah.
He's great. Yeah, so that's a really cool gig.
A lot of kudos.
Yeah. Steve, what about you? Favourite gig you've ever done?
I think depends what you mean by ever done. Well, in terms of what I was involved in, but I think we had the band Bush, who I don't know if you recall, they're back from the sort of the mid-90s. They came to our office and they played a gig in the office with us, just sort of around sitting in our office chairs, and that was just incredible to be involved in. So that was probably the highlight, I think. Yeah,
definitely.
No, very cool. Favourite city you've ever played?
San Francisco would be for me, I think.
Yeah. Mike?
Yeah.
Just Sydney, just the kind of pub life scene in Sydney was fantastic before, the whole kind of lockdown took over. So
exactly. Yeah. Favourite music documentary or movie, Mike?
Well, I'm going to say the Lucas making of post-production has been one of the best docos I've ever seen.
There you go. Nice. Steve?
I just got done watching one on, I think it's on Netflix. It was about Camden, which is a suburb here in London. And it was about all the musicians that have come through there. And there's one pub in particular called the Dublin Arms, I think it's called. And there's an owner there who's basically just let anyone have a go and, get up and put their band there. And there's been so many famous bands that have come through and had their origin just from this one particular pub. So that was a really good one I saw lately. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, I hadn't heard that one. Great. And then name one thing you'd like to see invented that would make your life as a keyboard player easier. Steve?
Not a change button. Well, I mean, I've had in mind for a long time to build a piece of software into a synthesizer for. I mean, I'm going on a real tangent here talking about it, but what I want to do is to basically take what you would do in 3D with designing something like, a big long concrete pipe with an air compressor on one end and a tuba on the other end or something, and turn that into an actual musical instrument so that you could design stuff in 3D and then play it for real. So it's been something may come back to and work on in the future. But I reckon that'd be cool. I've never seen anything like that in a synthesizer yet. So,
no, trademark that ASAP.
Yeah.
Mike?
I guess I'd love to see somehow some sort of emergence of keyboard as an instrument and AI, where that could go, where it could lead to not to make your life easier, but to enhance what you already do.
Yeah.
Predict what you're going to play. There's the world's the oyster, really.
In my case, it'd be, there's a solo coming up, AI. Can you do that for me, please?
I've got a bit of inside knowledge on that, and that is definitely coming. So,
I can imagine.
Doing some consultancy for a synth company at the moment, looking at that. So,
yeah, wow.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I'm a perfect guinea pig because I can't solo to save my life. Now, very last question. A favourite non-musical activity or hobby? What keeps you sane when you're not making music? Mike?
Probably not going to surprise you, Dave, travel.
Yes, no, fair call. Steve?
Photography and film. I think that'd be the one thing. If I can't do music, I'll be doing film and that kind of thing. So
amazing.
I like the visual stuff almost as much as the music, really.
Yeah. No, look, guys, I can't thank you enough. It's been absolutely amazing chatting with you. I mean, it still freaks me out that we've all known each other since 1994. All three of us have never been in the same room. Steve and I have only been in the same room only 6 weeks ago. Mike and I have had to put up with each other physically for many years, which has been great. So cannot thank. And look, Red Mercury will definitely be linking to, and I haven't plugged. Mike and I have a little project that we're very proud of, and purely my fault hasn't been active the last 6 months. Do check out Midnight Fields. I'll also link to that. And so we've released 4 or 5 songs with that. If you're more of an ambient fan, I mean, I love Steve's stuff. What genre would you place yours in? I just don't want to be super generic and say EDM. It's so much more than that. What genre would you place?
Drum and bass and progressive house.
Yeah.
Like trance and sort of stuff.
Yeah, no, amazing stuff. And ours is certainly a little bit more on the down low, Mike, I think it's fair to say.
Absolutely.
But yeah, we enjoy it. It's a pleasure working with you on that. So yeah, look, can't thank you both enough. Here's onwards and upwards to the next 40 years of our career. And we can sit on a veranda one day and go, you young whippersnappers have no idea how hard it was back in the day. And there we have it. I hope you enjoyed that slightly different episode. Mike and Steve are such great guys. I'm proud to call them friends. And it was just a real buzz talking about the old days. But in this case, as keyboard players out there, it's always worth being aware of some of the more cutting edge stuff, either at the present or in the past. And this is definitely in the past. But as Steve and Mike mentioned, it's sort of still traveling through to today. And just before we recorded, Steve mentioned, and I'll try and find the website, that essentially there was a genealogy or a family tree of this technology, and the Rocket software is one of the progenitors of what, across so many different things, streaming services for movies and so on. So it's an extreme measure of pride that I've played a very, very small part in what was a much bigger piece of work. And obviously I wasn't running the show by any stretch of the imagination. So, but yeah, it was just lovely to revisit that time. So I hope you enjoyed that extra episode. We'll be back again in a couple of weeks. Again, as always, a big shout out to our gold and silver supporters. Mike, you've just heard lots about Midnight Mastering. Please do, give him a go if you're after some high quality mixing and mastering. I do honestly vouch for the quality of his work. It is amazing. We have Tammy from Tammy's Musical Stew. Thank you, Tammy, as always. Appreciate your support. Dave and the team at the musicplayer.com forums, which, as an aside, was one of the partners way back then with the Rocket software, and that's how I first joined the musicplayer.com forums. So I'm still a proud member 20 plus years later. And then last but definitely not least, Dewi Evans from the lovely country of Wales. Dewi's about to come up on a live stream that we're going to do in a week or so. Thank you, sir, for your support. Thank you to all of you out there that do continue to listen. I hope you're enjoying the show and keep on playing in the meantime.